Hey everyone, welcome back to Exposed. I'm your host, Jim Chapman, and I am back with the third episode in the Notorious series covering pop icon Britney Spears. And in the second episode of this series, I brought you all the way through the year 2017. And Britney was deep into a conservatorship that gave her father and his legal partner an unbelievable amount of control over the life of Britney Spears. So that's where we're picking up today. Now, for 13 years and 4 months, the world watched Britney Spears perform under the strictest legal constraints you can imagine. She smiled on the stage in Las Vegas. She would release new music. She would judge television shows, and she would earn millions of dollars for the conservatorship estate. But behind the glitter and the perfectly timed dance routines, a quiet rebellion had began gaining traction. First, among a small group of dedicated fans who refused to accept the official story, and eventually among millions around the globe who would force the courts to listen. So it all started in 2018, and these cracks in the public image of Britney would be almost subtle. Britney's Instagram account, which had been relatively quiet and polished, it suddenly began posting videos that felt just kind of off. She would dance in her living room wearing casual clothes. Captions were oddly worded or rambling, and some posts appeared to be deleted almost as quickly as they went up. Now, to the casual observer, it might have looked normal, just celebrity content, right? But to a small group of longtime fans who have followed every detail of this conservatorship, those posts felt like coded distress signals. One fan account at Britney_is_free began dissecting videos frame by frame, and they noticed Britney blinking in patterns that some would interpret as Morse code. I'm not sure if that was actually the case, but they would interpret it that way. And they pointed out that her eyes often looked vacant or fearful, even when she was smiling. Hashtag Free Britney first appeared in tweets and Instagram comments in early 2018. But that didn't explode until later that year when Britney was placed back in a wellness facility in Las Vegas amid reports of mental health concerns. Fans would gather outside that facility with signs, and they would chant her name, and they would refuse to leave even when security would try to disperse them. By 2019, that movement had grown from a fringe online theory into a serious organized campaign. Britney's father, Jamie, he was still the primary conservator, but public skepticism was mounting. And in April of 2019, Britney was hospitalized again. It was then that fans organized their first major protest. This was outside of the West Hollywood courthouse where conservatorship hearings were held, and they would hold signs saying hashtag Free Britney and Britney deserves her rights. Celebrity voices began amplifying that cause. Even Miley Cyrus would tweet some support to hashtag Free Britney, and that, of course, trended worldwide. Now, in the year 2020, we all know what happened. The COVID-19 pandemic. And that gave the movement even more momentum because the world was locked down at that time. People would have time to dig into old court documents. They would watch every Vegas residency clip, and they would start connecting dots. And in February of 2021, the New York Times will release a bombshell documentary called Framing Britney Spears. That film examined the conservatorship, and it really dug deep. If you haven't seen it, go check it out. They used some archive footage, insider interviews, and legal experts to argue that Britney had been stripped of her civil rights far beyond what was necessary. And look, I agreed wholeheartedly with that documentary. Now, that documentary went viral overnight, and within days, hashtag Free Britney was trending at the #1 slot globally. Protests outside of the Los Angeles courthouse would grow from dozens to hundreds of supporters, and then thousands. Fans would camp out in tents, and they would play Britney's music on a loop, and they would live stream every court hearing. This pressure became impossible to ignore, and in June of 2021, the court scheduled a major status hearing. So for the first time in years, Britney was able to speak directly to the judge via Zoom. She was in her own home. She didn't have her father or the conservatorship team present in that room. And what happened next is really etched into pop culture history. On June 23rd of 2021, Britney Spears appeared on screen. She looked composed but visibly emotional, and for 23 minutes, she delivered a raw, unfiltered testimony that really stunned the courtroom, the media, and the world. And she would describe 13 years of what she called abusive control. She told the judge she had been forced to take lithium against her will, and that the conservatorship had prevented her from getting married, having another child. And the reason they prevented that is they refused to let her remove her IUD. She described being punished for speaking up. She described being placed in a locked facility, denied basic freedoms, and made to work against her will even when she was exhausted. And in one of the most chilling lines, she said, quote, "I'm not here to be anyone's slave. I just want my life back." She revealed she had been afraid to speak out earlier because she feared retaliation from that team. And she begged the court to end the arrangement, saying she had been traumatized and the system was doing her way more harm than good. Now, this testimony was broadcast live. Millions watched in real time, and within hours, the audio leaked across every platform. The hashtag Free Britney movement would erupt. Celebrities from Lady Gaga to Cher to Elton John, they would publicly demand her freedom. Protesters outside of the courthouse would swell to thousands. They would wave signs. They would chant in unison. And legal experts and mental health advocates called for immediate reform of California's conservatorship laws. Now, the legal momentum became unstoppable. In July of 2021, Britney's court-appointed attorney, Matthew Rosengart, he filed a petition to remove Jamie Spears as conservator. And that battle played out in open court. They had a lot of dramatic filings and counterfilings. And by September of 2021, Judge Brenda Penny suspended Jamie Spears as conservator, citing a toxic environment, and a neutral third party was appointed on a temporary basis. Then on November 12th of 2021, after more than 13 years, Judge Penny delivered the ruling fans had fought so hard for. That conservatorship was terminated in full. Britney Spears was declared a legally competent adult once again, and she was free to make her own decisions about her body, her money, her career, and her life. And that afternoon, outside of the courthouse, of course, the crowd went nuts. Fans would hug strangers. Britney's own social media post later that day was simple and powerful. Just a single heart emoji followed by the words, "I am free." Now, in her book she published 2 years later, she described the moment she learned the news. She said, "I cried for hours. I felt like I had been holding my breath for 13 years and could finally exhale." So the hashtag Free Britney movement, they had done what many legal experts once called impossible. And it was a group of mostly young, mostly female fans, and they were armed with nothing but smartphones, persistence, and an unshakable belief that something was deeply wrong. So she wakes up that morning after the conservatorship, and a lot of things had changed. She had no court-appointed monitors, no weekly allowance that had to get pre-approved, no permission slips required for basic life choices.
What am I going to do now that the conservatorship's over with? I've been in the conservatorship for 13 years. It's a really long time to be in a situation you don't want to be in. So I'm just grateful, honestly, for each day and being able to have the keys to my car and being able to be independent and feel like a woman. And owning an ATM card, seeing cash for the first time, being able to buy candles. In the Free Britney movement, you guys rock. Honestly, my voice was muted and threatened for so long, and I wasn't able to speak up or say anything. And because of you guys and the awareness of kind of knowing what was going on and delivering that news to the public for so long, you gave it awareness to all of them. And because of you, I honestly think you guys saved my life in a way. I'm here to be an advocate for people with real disabilities and real illnesses. I'm a very strong woman, so I can only imagine what the system has done to those people. So hopefully my little story, hopefully my story will make an impact and make some changes in the corrupt system.
So the first weeks and months of freedom were kind of a whirlwind of emotion and public celebration for Britney. She would start flooding her Instagram with unfiltered videos, dancing barefoot in her kitchen, singing along to old songs at the top of her lungs, posting silly selfies with no makeup, no filter. And for the first time in over a decade, her social media felt like it was actually hers and no one was scripting it. It was playful, chaotic, sometimes rambling, but I gotta say it was always authentic. And fans who had fought so hard for hashtag Free Britney, they celebrated every post like a victory lap. The world watched as Britney began to reclaim small, everyday freedoms that most of us take for granted: spontaneous road trips, late night ice cream runs, and even the simple joy of just saying yes or no without having to ask anyone first. Now, one of the most visible changes at this time was her relationship with Sam Asghari, the Iranian-American actor and fitness trainer who had been part of Britney's life since 2016, when they met on the set of a music video called Slumber Party. Their bond had quickly deepened through the final, most restrictive years of that conservatorship, and Sam had stood by her side through the court battles and the public scrutiny. He never seemed to seek the spotlight for himself, and in her first months of freedom, the relationship stepped firmly into the public eye. On September 12th, 2021, just 2 months before that conservatorship stopped, Britney posted a black and white photo of her and Sam, and they were kissing, and it was captioned simply with a ring emoji. And the engagement was official. Fans would erupt with joy. On June 9th of 2022, Britney and Sam, they would exchange vows in an intimate, star-studded ceremony at her home in Thousand Oaks, California. Britney would wear a custom white gown with a dramatic cape, and the groom, he was sharp in a classic black tuxedo. Close friends, family members, including her sons, Sean and Jaden, would attend, and even stars like Madonna, Paris Hilton, and Drew Barrymore would attend. Britney later called the day the happiest day of my life. She would post wedding photos that showed genuine, it looked like, smile on her face, the kind of smile that the world really hadn't seen from her in years. Now, that marriage represented a lot more than just romance. It would symbolize the new chapter of Britney living life in her own terms. But that freedom also brought the need to process 13 years of pain. In the summer of 2023, Britney announced she had written a book titled The Woman in Me. Now, that was released on October 24th of 2023, and it became an instant global hit. It sold over 2 million copies in its first week alone. The book was raw. It was deeply personal. For the first time, Britney put her own words to the experiences that tabloids would twist for the prior decades. She would detail the conservatorship's darkest moments, being forced to take that lithium and all those things I just discussed prior to this. She wrote about her childhood in Kentwood, the Mickey Mouse Club, the whirlwind romance with Justin Timberlake, including the painful breakup, and also some accusations she made with Justin Timberlake regarding an abortion. And the 2007 spiral that also led to that head shaving incident I told you about, she covered that. Pretty much everything we know now, we learned from that book. Now, this book was not just a tell-all. It was a release. Britney described the writing process as therapeutic, a way to finally speak her truth after years of being silenced or spoken for. The book would debut at #1 on the New York Times bestseller list, and it sparked kind of renewed conversations about that conservatorship and the need to reform it overall. It sparked mental health conversation, the toxic side of celebrity culture. Readers and critics would praise it for its honesty, some calling it one of the most important celebrity books of the decade. Now, with the book's success came a new wave of public attention and more challenges. Britney's Instagram posts grew more frequent and sometimes a little chaotic. She shared long streams of consciousness videos about family estrangements, particularly with her father, Jamie, and her sister, Jamie Lynn. She also posted about her ongoing struggles with anxiety and her desire to simply live quietly. She would post dancing videos in her living room. She would try new hobbies, and she spoke candidly about therapy and healing. There were moments of joy as well, celebrating holidays with Sam and her sons, and moments of visible pain when old wounds would surface. So in early 2024, after years of performing and promoting, Britney made an announcement that would just shock fans. On Instagram, she posted a video saying she was retiring from music. Quote, "I've been performing my whole life. I've done enough. I just want to live my life now." The decision was met with a mix of understanding and sadness. For some, it felt like a natural next step for a woman who had been working nonstop since childhood. And for others, it was a heartbreaking statement that she would not be returning back to the studio. Yet, even in retirement from music, Britney continued creating in her own way. She danced, she painted, she traveled, she focused on being present for her sons. Now, young adults moving on and trying to navigate their own lives, and she and Sam worked on building a stable private marriage away from the spotlight. There were ups and downs. There were public arguments over social media. There were family tension that would play out in the press, but Britney would repeatedly emphasize that these were her choices made freely without a court or conservator dictating the outcome. But post-conservatorship life was not going to be just a simple happily ever after story. 13 years of legal control, it had left some deep scars, and she had to learn to live without the structure that she had been living with for that 13 years, and that was a challenge in and of itself. Britney had spoken about the anxiety that still surfaces, the trust issues that she had to work on, the joy she found in small, ordinary moments that she once didn't get. She had rebuilt relationships with her sons. She had embraced a more authentic version of herself, and she was learning to live in a way that wasn't so controlled. So by the start of 2024, Britney Spears had been free from that conservatorship for just over 2 years. 26 months of waking up each morning with the extraordinary and sometimes terrifying realization that no judge, no father, no team of lawyers could dictate the smallest detail of her day. Remember, this is a woman who needed court approval to buy a pair of shoes or visit her own children just 2 years prior to that. Now, at 42 years old, she's learning to navigate a world that still watched every move, but they couldn't legally control it. The global spotlight that had built her into a billion-dollar brand, it never really dimmed. It just simply shifted its focus from staged performances to every unfiltered Instagram post she would post. And the first major chapter of this new area closed quietly but definitively in the spring of 2024. Britney and Sam, now they had separated in August of 2023 after 14 months of marriage, but that divorce was finalized in May of 2024. And it was a private settlement. It didn't include any ongoing spousal support, and a mutual agreement to keep the details out of the press was agreed to by both. Britney later reflected on the relationship in candid Instagram videos, describing it as feeling, in her own words, quote, weird and like a fake distraction during a time when she was still fighting for meaningful time with her sons. Now, Sam, for his part, he moved on gracefully, and he's been publicly dating since early 2025. Now, that divorce was handled with dignity. There were no explosive tabloid wars, no dramatic accusations traded back and forth in the media, but it marked the end of the first serious post-conservatorship romance that Britney had. And for Britney, it was another step in learning what it's meant to choose relationships on her own timeline without the weight of the conservatorship hovering over every detail. Now, even as her personal relationships would shift, Britney continued to assert her independence in a bigger, more permanent, and more financially empowering way. So after years of rebuilding, reflecting, and quietly taking stock in the empire she had built since she was a teenager, she made a landmark decision that signaled a new kind of freedom most artists really only dream about. On December 30th of 2025, Britney quietly sold her entire music catalog, every master recording, every publishing right, every single note of the catalog that had defined a generation. And she sold it to a New York-based independent music company called Primary Wave. And that news would break publicly on February 10th of 2026. And sources close to that deal placed the value of that deal at approximately $200 million, which to me was great for Britney. This is a boatload of money, but I honestly think her catalog might be worth about twice that amount. Now, this sale was no small, impulsive transaction. The catalog included every smash hit: Baby One More Time, Oops, I Did It Again, Toxic, I'm a Slave for You, Circus, everything she's ever done. Over 2 decades of hits that had sold more than 150 million records worldwide and generated billions in revenue. Now, Primary Wave was a company known for thoughtfully acquiring and preserving catalogs from legends like Prince, Whitney Houston, Notorious B.I.G., and they now controlled one of the most valuable and significant songbooks of the millennial era. But for Britney, this sale represented a lot more than money. It was final, decisive, and a symbolic deep step towards complete financial autonomy. After 13 years, with every royalty check, every endorsement dollar, every tour advance that had been funneled through a conservatorship controlled by others, she was now the one deciding what happened to the life's work that she had created with her own voice. She described the decision as freeing and a weight lifted, and it allowed her to step away from the constant pressure of catalog management while securing her future and her son's future in a way no court could ever touch again. That catalog sale also gave her some breathing room and some long-term security. But you know how it goes. Freedom never comes without new challenges or new scrutiny. And in the months that followed, Britney's Instagram would remain the public window into her unscripted reality. A steady stream of barefoot dance videos filmed in her kitchen in Kentwood, Louisiana. Candid late-night reflections on family estrangements with her father, Jamie, and her sister, Jamie Lynn. And honest, sometimes raw discussions about anxiety would just flutter that Instagram. Britney would speak about the everyday moments that she was once denied, including cooking family meals, watching movies together, or simply sitting on the porch talking without a monitor or court order hanging over every word she said. Then, on March 4th of 2026, in the evening, a moment occurs that brings the world attention rushing back into Britney Spears' life. Around 9:30 p.m., California Highway Patrol officers, they pulled Britney over on US 101 in Ventura County, not far from her home, after reports of a vehicle swerving and speeding. Officers would note the smell of alcohol, Britney's admission that she had consumed a mimosa earlier in the evening and was taking prescribed medications, and they would do some field sobriety tests and claim she was impaired. She was arrested of driving under the influence and booked into custody just after 3 a.m. the following morning. Now, she did get released a few hours later on her own recognizance. And it's important to mention that in this case, she blew under the legal limit. I just wanted to mention that. She blew as if she only had one mimosa. So this news, it would trigger an immediate global wave of concern, speculation. Old tabloids would start writing again, and headlines would scream across every platform about Britney's spiral narrative. But this time the conversation was a little more nuanced. Longtime hashtag Free Britney supporters would point to years of trauma, the lingering effects of forced medication, and the immense pressure of living life in public after 13 years of legal control. Mental health advocates, they would use the moment to discuss the reality of recovery, that freedom does not magically erase trauma. And Britney's representatives, they would issue a statement acknowledging the incident as completely inexcusable, while confirming she planned to fully comply with the law and focus on her health and well-being. So in April of 2026, Britney enters a treatment facility voluntarily, and she spends several weeks addressing issues that had surfaced and recommitted to the therapy and support system she had built since that conservatorship ended. On May 4th, she appeared in court. She pleaded guilty to a lesser charge called wet reckless, which is basically driving with drugs or alcohol involved. She received probation, mandatory DUI classes, and continued therapy treatment. The judge praised Britney for her willingness to take accountability and seek help. Now, Britney has since completed her initial treatment program, and she has returned to a quieter routine. She'll post occasional updates on Instagram, but it seems like her stability is getting back, in my opinion. As of this recording in May of 2026, she's been spending meaningful time with her sons, cherishing, of course, the relationship that they have and that they are rebuilding together. Her Instagram presence still remains a mix of carefree dance videos, personal reflections, just everything you could think of. And there have been no announced plans for a full-scale return to the stage in the United States, though she has expressed interest in some select international performances in places like the UK and Australia, shows that would feel like celebrations rather than obligations, performed only when she chooses. Public feuds with family members have occasionally resurfaced on social media, but Britney has repeatedly emphasized these are now her choices to make. And the woman who once sold over 150 million records worldwide, commanded the world's biggest stages, has in many ways come full circle. That little girl from Kentwood who dreamed on church stages and Mickey Mouse Club sound stages has survived the toxic machinery of fame. The legal cage of a conservatorship, the relentless gaze of the public, and the very real struggles that come with learning to live free after so many years of control. That $200 million catalog sale will secure her financially in a way no court or conservator can ever again threaten. The DUI incident and the subsequent treatment shows that the road to healing will be ongoing, but she's making it work. So 13 years of control taught the world what happens when a superstar's life is no longer her own. The years since have shown something even more powerful. A survivor learning day by day what it truly means to be free. Not perfect, not polished, not performing for anyone else's approval, but simply living life on her own terms, in her own time, with her voice finally, fully, and forever her own. It's my hope and sincerely my prayer that Britney eventually finds peace. We love her here in South Louisiana. And to us, she will always be the South Louisiana girl from Kentwood with the big voice. So Britney, if you're listening, I'd love to get you down to Denham Springs for an interview. We are all pulling for you down here. And there you have it. Thanks so much for listening. If you got anything out of this podcast, please share it on your social media. Thank you, as always, to my Patreon supporters. And if you would like to support the show and get a ton of benefits in the process, check us out, patreon.com/exposed podcast files. Got a lot of good stuff coming up for you in the next several weeks. Until then, for Exposed, I'm your host, Jim Chapman. Much love.